Well, hello and welcome to TransForm Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to be joined today by Sarah Mitchell, head of our documentation department. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we have got a cool presentation for you. It is part 2 of the TransForm programming language. So this is going to be a multi-part series. Last week I did just basically an introduction to it. We talked about what it is, so where you go to use it, how to get to it, how to get to the editors and things like that. But today we're really going to sort of dive into the meat of TPL programming. And we're going to begin that right down here in my slide deck, 352, with variables, expressions, and statements. Before we get started, Sarah, I was just wondering, can you see my screen and is my voice coming through?
Yes.
Fantastic, thanks very much. All right, let's get started. So variables, expressions, and statements. First of all, I am not going to assume that you've never taken a programming class before, because I imagine all of you, even if you haven't taken a class, have got some experience with programming. Now, that wouldn't have always been the case 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but by now, everyone has dipped their toes into it to a certain extent. So I don't expect you to be experts at all in programming, but you probably already know a thing or two. So when I tell you things about variables, I'm not going to get too crazy and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to keep this high level. Should you find that it's a little bit too, I don't go into the details enough about something, go ahead and type a question into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Also, now is a good time to remind you that you could always send questions to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. So let's dive in with variables, expressions, and statements. So what are the differences between these three things? Well, a variable I think you're already familiar with. You probably learned it in math class. Let x equal 1 or something like that, or a plus b equals c. So a variable, often in the case of a business application, might be something like quantity. So that's just a variable is an entity which holds some sort of value. It could be a number, could be a string, could be a date, could be an array of things, and so on. An expression, on the other hand, is something that basically contains usually multiple, but not always, multiple variables, constants, other types of values, combined with some sort of operator. So an example would be quantity times price. It's going to give you back a number. The key behind expressions in general is they always return some sort of value, even if that value is blank. And last but not least, we have statements, and statements are things that let you are things that let you assign certain things. Hang on a second, let me check. It looks like I got a question or something here in the chat. I don't. All right. Thanks very much. Yeah. So a statement, think about a statement as something you're actually telling it to do something, like set this variable extension equal to quantity times price would be an example of a statement. So expressions are used, so statements are used to build out your code in TPL, but as are expressions, but expressions are used, not statements, in other things like in if commands when you're building your form designs. You can also use them in HTML blocks and some other things to get a value back. So let's take a closer look at these, and I think we're going to start with variables, and for that matter, variables, and it's two related topics here, constants and fields. So a constant is just something that is always the same value. For example, it could be the number 42, or it could be the last name McCormick, for example, in quotes, and that would just be a value. Next one is a field. And this refers to a field in your TransForm form design. So, and keep in mind, when you run TPL code, you're running it within a form. So it has access to the data that the user has entered in. So you could put that right here into last name. I mean, for example, so you can access that by placing a hashtag in front of it and referring to the field's name. The last thing is a variable, and there are a couple different kinds. We'll get into that in a moment. Actually, there are a couple different kinds of fields too, which we'll also get into. But a variable is just something you set a value to. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first of these three types of objects. So a constant in TPL, there can be two kinds, and only two kinds. One is a number, which is represented, as numeric, or it can be a string, which you put inside quotation marks. I'm sorry, when I was putting together my presentation, it uses these smart quotes. Never use smart quotes in actual programming. They're not the right kind of quotes. So, but double quotes basically is how you quote out a string. Now you're probably saying to yourself, Dave, I've used some other programming languages there. I know there are other kinds of constants. What about like a date, for example? Well, TPL actually treats dates as strings. We do have functions that know how to look into a string and manipulate the date information that's in there, but really there are just really two types of values that we work with, constants and with strings. So let's move on to the next one. Oops, lose my place here. Constants. The next one are fields. So in the previous example, I said hashtag last name could access the last name field here. If you had a field called total, you could access that as well. And you access these fields by using a hashtag in front of them. But there are a couple other types of fields, and this one I'm not even sure you call a field at all, that uses a slightly different syntax, and I'll tell you about them right now. If you use a double hashtag, for example, you'll be referring to something that's within a data group. So for example, if you had built out an invoice form and you had repeating set of fields for collecting the product that they ordered, the price, and the quantity, you could refer to those, and those would actually be an array. I'm not going to touch the array one this week. We're going to talk about arrays along with objects and some other things in a future one, which will either be the next week or the week after. The next type of field we have is a system field, or is what we call a meta field. And these aren't fields that you actually create. These are fields that we've created for you and apply to every single form design that you make. There are about 10 of them. You can find them in the documentation, and I'll show you where the documentation is in a moment. And so one of these, for example, is called the completed field. And that is one that lets you know when was the last time someone has edited this form. That might be a piece of information that you would like to know. You can grab that right out of this field. And then lastly, there are the system level ones. And this is, tell me who the logged in user name is, for example. And there are a couple other things. You can learn what the account ID is. You can learn some other things that are system level. Now, in TPL, when you do programming, you can actually programmatically change the total, and you can programmatically change the item name. Some of these other fields, though, are changed only by the system, so you don't really have access to them. So those are fields. And now let's go to the next slide. And we're going to talk about variables. So variables can exist at two different scopes. You can have a variable that you only use while you're running a particular TPL function or event, and those you'll probably use quite often. But there's another kind of variable called, and you just refer to them, you could just make up any name for them. You know, you could say a equals 7, and you've created a variable called a, and you've assigned it to the number 7. And you can change that because it's a variable. However, there's also a global type of variable, and you do that just by putting a caret sign in front of that. And the nice thing about the global variables is they continue to exist while that form is open. So you can keep referring back to them for some, you can maybe use it for keeping a running total or for other things like that. So those are actually very handy. We'll get into why you would use those. All right, so now let's move on to expressions on our way to statements. And so an expression can be something is something that returns a value or comes out to a value. Its simplest case could just simply be a value itself. 42, by the way, is an expression. It's the expression that results in 42. Another expression could be 6 times 7 or 43 minus 1. Each of them are going to give you back a numeric value. Here, an expression 40 is greater than 2 is going to give you back a value, but it's going to be a true or false value. In TransForm, a true value is represented by a 1, a false value is represented by blank. I'm going to show you that in a minute, how you can actually use that. And then we have some other ones. For example, last name is equal to dent. So no matter how you spelled dent, as long as it was spelled D-E-N-T, that would result in a true value, a 1. Whereas last name has an exact match to dent. In other words, case is important here. Then that would actually come out to be false unless you had entered in the last name field in this exact sort of capitalization. So it's very frequently the case that you're not going to be interested when you're comparing strings to know whether or not it's uppercase or lowercase. So this equal one compares it either way. Now I would like to back up one slide and just talk about variables, because here case is important. If I created something called my local variable, and if you'll notice I've done this here in camel case, right? The first letter is and the whole word, the first letter and the rest of the word is lowercase for the first word, and then it's capital, and it's a capital. Kind of looks like bumps, that's why it's called camel case. That's important. If you call it my local variable and you do the capitalization wrong or differently, it's not going to be the same variable. It's going to be a different one, so keep that in mind. However, when you're comparing strings, case is not important. So I just wanted to fill you in there because that's something people run into. And then the last one is the operator here is a concatenation one, where I've taken Arthur space and then dent, and if I stuck those two together, you would see that the result was Arthur dent. So what do all these things here, at least here, have in common? Well, they're all using a type of operator. Here I'm using a multiplication operator. Here's subtraction. Here's the greater than. Here's the is equal to or exactly equal to, concatenation. Those are just some of the operators that are available, but here are all the operators that are available. So plus and minus, of course, you're familiar with, but we have the exclamation mark, which is used to indicate not. Asterisk is multiplication, slash is division, greater than, less than, equals to, exactly equals to. This one is the concatenate you've seen, and this is the and the or operators. So they're used for performing logical types of comparisons. We'll get into that either in a minute or right now. Let's see what the next slide brings us to. 360. Oh yeah, left and let's go check some of these out. All right, so I'm going to pop over here into Safari, and I'm going to go into TransForm. And let's actually leave here, oops, and go to a home tab so I can show you how I got here. Make this a little bigger. Okay, so here we are in Alpha TransForm. I'm going to go into the designer, and I've already selected a form. I can choose any form for this. I'm just doing an example. So let's choose my 5S audit form. And I went down here, and because I have enable custom code for this form type enabled, I'm allowed to go into the code editor. So I'm going to click edit custom code. And there I am in the custom code section. And I'm actually going to cancel. Oops, my bad. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into a place called the tester. So I'm going to click the tester link. And down here is where I can test out some of my expressions. The tester can be used for testing out functions and all kinds of other things, but today we're just going to use the simplest case, and that is expressions. So let me just make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it without as much clutter. All right, there we go. Oops, might be too big, we'll see. Yeah, okay, that's good. So we want to take a look here at this area of the screen. Okay, so now here, let's put in a couple of expressions. Let's say 3 times 4. And as you can see, that results in the expression 12. You were probably expecting that to happen. Let's try star and wars. We'll be doing a concatenation. And that's it. And in this case, it also came back with a result. Now, if you'll notice, it did give me a result, and when it does evaluate correctly, in other words, I didn't make a syntax error, this result thing here is going to appear in green. If I do make a syntax error, something like that, let's just say, I'm going to get an error here. It's going to appear in red. If you are colorblind, don't worry about it, because it'll either say the error and what it is, or it's going to say no result. And both cases mean a syntax error has taken place. All right, so those were some pretty simple ones. Let's try one of the more interesting ones. Let's say, let's do a logical one. Dent is equal to we'll compare these two strings, and the result is you get back as a 1. That means that it's true. And now we're going to say, all right, but are these exactly equal to each other? I'm going to execute that. And what we got back was a blank result. That means that it is false. They don't exactly match each other because the capitalization is different. And now let's try something a little bit crazier. Let's say 1 is greater than 2, and 1 or 2 is greater than 1. So if one of these conditions is true, and of course the second one is, that should give us a true result. But now let's go with an and. If 1 is greater than 2 and 2 is greater than 1, of course that's not the case. What we should get back is a blank result, and we do. So that's the template testers single line code, the code editor testers single line code section there. Let's pop back into PowerPoint, and let's move on now that we've gotten sort of a handle of expressions. If there are any questions, by the way, go ahead, type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, statements. So statements, like I said, make the system actually do something. They don't just result in a value, they tell you to do something with that value. And usually often it's, set a variable to equal to something. So in this case, set x equal to 1. And this is called an assignment statement. And there are 4 different types of assignment, I don't know if you call them operators, but assignment statements that you can make. One is the equal sign. One is plus equals. That means take whatever is in x and add another 2 to it to give the answer back. So if we set x equal to 1 and then we said x plus equals 2, we get 3 back as the answer. Minus equal works in a similar but opposite way, in the sense that it give me whatever x has got in it, but subtract 1 from it and then tell me what the answer is. And then the last one, assignment statement, is you could do a concatenation. In other words, add these two. Are these two together? So we'll move on to the next section and we'll take a look at the if and for statement. That's called a keyword statement, and there are 2 of them. The if and if is one of them, and the other is the for and end for. They're the only 2 keyword statements that I know of currently in TPL. So let's take a look at how one of those might work. So here's an example of a statement. Let's say a equals 7, and then we'll say if a is equal to 7, keep in mind this is a double equals, then response equals you have 1, otherwise the response equals try again. Okay, that should make sense. And then next, another statement, this time with a for statement. Sum is equal to 0 for I equals 1 to 10, sum plus equals 1. So that puts together some of the things we've learned together. And all this will do is it will start adding to this variable called sum, each of these. So first it adds 1, then it adds another 1, then it adds another 1, all the way through until you get to 10. And then, so someone had a question. So the question is, since the result in the and comes back blank, false, rather than 0, how do we test this in an if statement? So it knows that, for example, so basically, if it does come back blank, that's considered to be false by our if statements. You should be fine with that. Hopefully that makes sense. So you're not testing for 1 or 0, you're testing, so in other words, the if statement is smart enough to know the difference between 1 and blank. Okay, so next statement here I went over, and then finally, this is sort of the last thing I wanted to cover, and then that's it for today. And that is the fact that you can break your statements over multiple lines, and to do that, just use a slash. And you can also add in on each line a comment. So what we've done here, for example, is we say if A is greater than or equal to 10 and A is less than 20, in other words, if it's within this range, then it comes out true. And so here we've said slash so that we could put this next A on this next line as opposed to sticking it up here. And here we put a little, a single quote to let you know that, or apostrophe, I guess it's called, to let you know that that the rest of it is going to be a comment. So that's all I've got. Are there any other questions? If not, we will break. That looks like it. Hey, thank you everyone for showing up. If you have other questions, send them to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. Thanks very much, Sarah, for being here and helping out. I will be here next week for the next TransForm Tuesday, where we're going to be talking about events. And then the following week, Sarah Mitchell, head of our documentation department, who's here today, will be actually doing a couple of the presentations after that. So I think they'll turn out great. Anyway, thanks again, everyone. Take care and goodbye. Stay well.
Look, Dave,
Yeah.
Before you go, where would people go if they wanted to learn more?
That's a good question. Do we have documentation on that? I asked the head of documentation.
TPL?
Let's take a look. We're going to go to, this is the way I find it. Maybe it's not the fastest way. I go to documentation at alphasoftware.com, and then I click here, Alpha Transform Help. And today we were talking about TPL. And so you can start here and then go here, a couple places. Let me grab this link from the permalink box. I'll toss that into chat. There we go. Thanks very much, Sarah. I forgot that I was going to show people how to do that. So that covers a lot of the stuff that we went over today, including the sample code and things. That also includes a lot of stuff we did not go over today, will be covered by me and Sarah in the future. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. Stay well. Bye-bye.